10:05. Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show on News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. Remember, you can download the KFYO app and listen to us anywhere you may be traveling. Hope you're having a fantastic day. This is the final hour of today's show, and we've got a lot to get into. Never a dull moment in the Texas legislature. As we've been covering over the last couple of days since I returned from vacation, this secret audio now between a meeting of Speaker Dennis Bonnen, Representative Dustin Burrows, and also Michael Quinn Sullivan of Empower Texans, and do a little bit of analysis on this, give us his thoughts as to what's happening. The executive editor of our friends over at the Texas Tribune, Ross Ramsey. Ross, welcome back to the show. How are you today?
I'm fine. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's always good to visit with you. And you had a really good piece out yesterday about the crisis for House Speaker Dennis Bonnen. This thing, it seems like it continues to grow by the day, Ross. Where are we right now in this whole episode with Dennis Bonnen, Dustin Burrows, and Michael Quinn Sullivan?
I guess, the quick recap of this is Michael Quinn Sullivan met with Dennis Bonnen and Dustin Burrows right after the session on June 12th and taped the conversation, he says, or recorded the conversation. I guess they weren't using tape, but recorded the conversation. And they exchanged some letters at the end of June. Michael Quinn Sullivan's letter to the speaker is not public yet, either from either party. And then Bonnen replied and said, "You misunderstood our conversation," in a letter that is public. And then a month after that, Michael Quinn Sullivan wrote a blog post basically spelling out a conversation in which he said Bonnen and Burrows offered to exchange media floor passes for Michael Sullivan's organization in return for Sullivan's political participation in opposition to 10 Republicans in the Texas House. Bonnen says that's not true. Sullivan says he has a recording of it. The recording is not yet public. So, I remember an old editor telling me, secret evidence is not evidence, or secret evidence is suspect evidence. But the question is, does the recording say what Sullivan said it says, or does it back the speaker's and Dustin Burrows' version of the story? And in the middle of all of this, so that's one thing. You've got a little procedural over here. On the other hand, you have the Texas House, where rumors spread faster than a high school cafeteria, and the members are rattling around and saying, from variously, from I support Dennis and Dustin to, if you can't trust them to not run against members, what can you trust them with? And in the House, this sort of a crisis of trust occurring right now. The tape or the recording will settle some of this, but you've got the House talking about the loyalty of the speaker in a way that a 7-month speaker really would rather have them not talking about.
Well, and I think just for the Republican Party overall, this is not what you want. Yeah, I mean, going into a what I think is going to be a very competitive 2020 for many of these seats, and for just for Republicans and Democrats overall, the last thing you want is a public feud and a public division, right?
Well, I think that's right. I think the Democrats are dancing on this, and it's a gift to them. They can go into this and say, look what's happening in the House, and put the worst light on this. They can, as they have in the past, harp on the Attorney General's pending indictments. He's still, they're still working through the courts and trying to figure out, if that thing is ever going to go to trial. They have a Texas swamp story that they can build here. And I'm not sure that that's entirely fair, but we're talking about electoral politics.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, right. So apparently we know of 3 lawmakers who have heard this audio, who have said that they've heard this audio.
Right. Jonathan Stickland from Bedford up north of Fort Worth, Steve Toth from the Woodlands north of Houston, and Travis Clardy, who was one of the people who ran for Speaker and was defeated by Dennis Bonnen. He's from Nacogdoches.
Yeah. apparently there have been a couple of more who have heard the audio. Their names have not been released yet, but Tony McDonald on Twitter this morning at least said that there were more lawmakers who have heard this audio. As someone in the news business, Ross, over at the Texas Tribune, do we have to, and do you think the public has to hear this tape or this audio for it to be believed?
I think that at the very least, the House has to hear it. The people who decide who the speaker is and what they think of, the situation. You have to go through a normal sort of evidentiary thing here. You got to say, this is a bad story. If you actually have the goods, show us the goods. And The goods in this case are the recording. And the two steps with that are going to be, is this a bona fide recording? Has it been messed with? Is it complete and accurate, A? And B, what's it say? And until you know the answers to those two questions, you're not to the bottom of you don't have the facts in hand to make a really smart decision. Now, the problem in politics is that, often decisions are made without the facts in hand. So you've got members of the House right now, who haven't heard the recording but have heard all of the allegations, who are, tearing their hair out or burning it.
Yeah. Yesterday you said that the water's getting hot for Dennis Bonnen.
I think it's because the House is restive about this. You've got a controversy in the House that, that's never good for the Speaker. You've got people talking about whether they can trust the Speaker or not, and whatever their answer is to that, that's a gnarly question for a Speaker to be dealing with. And, they all thought it was going to be a nice quiet summer, and, they came out of a session on a high note and thought they were going to come out of, run through the summer pretty flawlessly, and now they've got this thing burning.
How does Dennis Bonnen, before we even get to Burrows, but for Bonnen himself, how does he get through this?
If the recording matches his story, he wins, and he's out of this, and everybody says, never mind. If it's as Michael Quinn Sullivan says it's a very, very tough thing to get out of. The kind of the compact that you make. It's not explicit, but, the implicit compact that you make if you're Speaker is the members of the House elect you, give you the power and the corner office and the high chair in the House and all of that stuff in return for you catching the slings and arrows that are directed at the House, whether those come from outside the Capitol, whether they come from the governor, from the lieutenant governor, wherever. It's the Speaker's job to protect the members from all of that kind of stuff, and then on a quieter level to protect the members from other members, when they start, going after each other politically. And in fact, when they came out of the legislative session, Dennis Bonnen said he didn't want anybody running in the House participating in races against their colleagues of either party, which was sort of unusual, got a lot of Republicans mad at him, said, we should be opposing Democrats wherever they sit. But that was his public stance, and then you get this allegation against him, which is directly contrary and also is not only directing fire at members, but against members of his own party.
Yeah. So if the audio is not released, though, and it doesn't become public, which it's hard for me to believe that that's not going to happen, but if it doesn't become public, if Michael Quinn Sullivan only releases it to let's say a handful of Republican House members, then what?
Then I think you don't have proof. And if you don't have proof, then if the object here is to knock the Speaker out of place, you have to provide the goods. Ultimately you have to provide the proof of this, or it's just a he said thing. And honestly, because of his opposition to a lot of politicians over the years, and because he's been a political provocateur. Michael Quinn Sullivan is not a guy that comes in with a high degree of a big reputation for telling the truth in situations like this. And it's not that all of them call him a liar, but some of them do, and a lot of them don't like him politically, and they'd rather believe Bonnen. So he's got a little bit of an extra obstacle here that he can overcome easily by just releasing the full recording.
Visiting with Ross Ramsey of the Texas Tribune. Ross, for Representative Burrows here, how does this play out for him? Obviously, if it comes out and everything's on Dennis Bonnen's side, then Burrows is fine.
Right.
What's the fallout if it doesn't go that way?
Well, if it doesn't go that way, I mean, if Bonnen comes out badly in this, everybody with Bonnen comes out badly, and Burrows is with Bonnen. One of the curious things about this is that Bonnen has said that he included Burrows in this meeting because he thought that, if it was a one-on-one meeting between him and Sullivan, it might be represented, and he brought Burrows in as a witness. But we've got a situation now where the witness isn't talking. Burrows has been very, very quiet, and, without that witness, without that testimony, if you will, that Bonnen doesn't get the help he was looking for. Now, I think he and Bonnen are probably, I don't think he's crossed Bonnen to do this. I think he's probably hoping the Bonnen side prevails. But his silence is really, really interesting.
How is that? Have you heard anything? How's that silence from Burrows? How's that resonating with the other House Republicans? Is there any talk about that?
Yeah, there's a lot. If you to simplify this, if there's doubt about what the speaker's telling people or about what that side is telling people, that's bad for the speaker. And right now, without the recording in hand, there's some doubt about that. If you're the speaker, you want to erase the doubt, and you want members to know that everything's solid, that you're on a solid foundation, and that the speaker's got their back. Burrows is in league with that. And Burrows being quiet, Sullivan sort of doing a drip, 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 playing the tape or the recording for members, one or two or three at a time, sows doubt. And that's to the benefit of people who want to destabilize the House, and it's to the detriment of the people in the House who want it, settle down.
How do you think this ends?
I have no idea. I mean, honestly, if I knew what was on the recording, early on in this thing, I sent a note to somebody who I'll identify as adjacent to one of the principals, and got a note back that said there were three people in the room, and I wasn't one of them.
Right.
And I wasn't one of them either. So I don't know what was actually said in there. I can, like anybody else, I can say if this was said, then that means such and such. But until you know what was said, and this is why the evidence is so important, until you know what actually happened, you don't know what actually happened, and you can't really make a judgment about it.
Have we seen any movement in trying, in anyone else trying to get this audio? I know that that y'all tried to get the audio and y'all were denied. I think just about every news outlet's going to be denied, access to this audio.
Right. I think a lot of unofficial people, or official's the wrong word. I think a lot of official people have asked for it and not seen it. One of them is the Speaker of the House. Obviously he knows what was said in the room, and Burrows knows what was said in the room. Bonnen has asked Sullivan to make the recording public. So obviously he thinks that, that clears his name if everybody hears that recording. The other thing is, there's an argument here, and I'm not a lawyer, but there's an argument here that if there actually was a straight-up offer of a government action in return for a political favor, if you oppose these 10 candidates, then I will give you and your organization a media pass to cover the floor of the House that you've been asking for and have long been denied. That's what Michael Sullivan, basically alleged in his initial posting on this. If that's a straight-up this for that offer like that, then you've got a question of whether there was a law broken here, and you've got potentially some interest from prosecutors and investigators.
Yeah.
So, there are other parties that are interested in hearing this recording and kind of getting to the bottom of this thing for legal reasons, for political reasons, for, just because they're interested in this stuff. But really the hinge here is whether that recording becomes public and whether that recording says what it's been represented to say.
Yesterday morning when you and I talked, we said, who knows what's going to happen in the next 24 hours. The last 24 hours have been pretty quiet, at least on this front. Were you surprised by that?
No, not really. I think, this question is hanging about, when should this evidence become public? And Sullivan is playing the recording for more members. So, it's like I said, it's kind of a drip, drip, drip thing, but there's nothing forcing a decision or forcing an action. There's no impending date coming up or anything, by which we have to decide something. So I think for the moment it's just that question hanging, and we'll see kind of how it plays out from here.
Yeah. Before I let you go, I want to ask you real quick, just your thoughts on the announcement yesterday by Will Hurd that he's not going to be seeking re-election, another retirement by a Texas Republican.
I think it's a bombshell. There have been a couple of retirements already that were more or less expected. Pete Olson retired, down there in a county in Fort Bend County, which is basically going blue. He had a very tough race last time. He's been in Congress for a while. He just decided to hang it up. Conaway decided not to run again. I think that was, that one's not politically driven. I think he's just, served and he wants to move on. There are a couple of more that are sort of rumored. We'll see how those go. But the Hurd thing, nobody really saw coming. It's one of the true swing districts in America. He's the last black Republican or the only black Republican in Congress. He's been because he has more of the border of the U.S.-Mexico border than any other member of Congress, he's been, outspoken with some expertise in a way that, not always with the Trump administration on border issues. Yeah. And, for some Republicans was, like a middle way somewhere between the Republicans they grew up with and Trump and that wing of the party, and had become an outsized voice in Congress. And I think, and in the Texas delegation, certainly. His decision to retire makes it much more difficult for Republicans to hold that seat, much more difficult for them to, gain some traction in the House. And I think, the fewer competitive seats that you have in Texas from a Republican standpoint, the harder it is going to be for Republicans to stop the state's shift from very, very red to just plain old red. I don't think it's a Democratic state yet. I don't think it's a purple state yet. But it's getting less and less red every election, and, this isn't a good sign for the Republicans.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, great. Ross Ramsey, appreciate your time today, TexasTribune.org. Y'all keep up the great work, and we'll visit with you later on.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Ross Ramsey with the Texas Tribune. We'll be right back.